Okay, Venus. Okay, first of all, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Mars when retrograde, not otherwise, but Saturn, Jupiter, Mars when retrograde always are extremely important. And I always find that the Saturn and Mars periods are almost more memorable, meaning we remember them more, because they're cruel planets. And they create situations where there's more pressure that we just tend to remember better. Okay, Venus, Mercury, even when retrograde, are not going to be as huge of a long-term life-changing things. First of all, they happen more often. Venus, on average, will retrograde, go forward, back, and forward again in your first house about every 8 years. Okay? When that happens, relationships start focusing your path. Now, even if it doesn't go retrograde, it'll focus your life in a relationship-centered way a little bit. But it'll do so in a much more life-changing way when it retrogrades back and forth through there. So again, when the planet retrogrades through that first house is when you have to pay attention to it. In fact, when it does that, there's two things happening. The retrograde planet will be in your house longer. So of course it's going to be more important. Second of all, a retrograde planet is closer to Earth, and therefore it's the most powerful. In fact, some books call a retrograde planet Shakti, which means power, powerful. So retrograde planets are more powerful. So when they're retrograding, they have a bigger impact in that house that they're going through. They're closer to Earth, so they're going to affect us more. So one person will work towards their engagement, towards their marriage. They're engaged and focused on their marriage plans when Venus was retrograding through their first house. Okay? I oftentimes find people who have their first girlfriend or first romantic encounter when Venus retrogrades through the first house. But anytime Venus is in your first house, especially when it's retrograde, you tend to take a step up in your human relationships. Oftentimes that's in, romantic type relationships, but it could be in other types of relationships too. If you're a teacher, it could be in relationships with your students, because Venus rules your students. It could be a relationship with your father, because Venus has a say on your father. It can be relationships in your attitude towards people, being more diplomatic, more peaceful. One client, when Venus retrograded through their first house, became a pacifist. This is someone who tended to be a conflictual person, who when Venus retrograded through their first house started to just adopt a more diplomatic, peaceful attitude with the people that they would usually have had conflicts with. Okay? Okay, so those are the type of things you notice when Venus moves to the first house. More relationship-centered. What does that mean? That means being in situations where both people get the best possible result out of it. That, of course, means diplomatic relationships, but also means mutually productive relationships. When Venus moves through your first house, you somehow work on a relationship or many relationships to just be a little more balanced in that relationship. Okay? That's pretty much simple for Venus. Okay? Not as dramatic as Mars. Okay? Now, but it's a very important transit because people come to astrologers for so much relationship-centered stuff. So if a person's been having problems in their relationship, and you see Venus, or their relationships, meaning they're always doing the wrong dumb thing, and so relationships don't work, well, they're going to have Venus go through their first house and retrograde a little bit to really take the next step up to being a better partner. And I guess that's the way I'll say it. Venus makes you a better partner as it goes through your first house. Okay? Mars makes you better able to defend yourself. Jupiter makes you better with your money. Saturn makes you better with your time. Okay? That's a real easy, quick way to look at it. Mercury makes you better with your skills. So what's the hard, skillful thing you're trying to do? Is it painting, drawing, music, whatever it is? Astrology, if you're trying to hone your skills and predictions. Mercury is your skills, your ability to do something at a high and perfective level. That's Mercury. Okay? If you're a baseball player, how many times you hit the ball, how many times you strike somebody out, that's all Mercury. Okay? If you're a poker player, how many hands you win. If you're a gambler, how much money you win. These are all your skills, any of those type of skills. Okay? When Mercury goes through the first house, it's an opportunity for your skills to improve. You get more skillful, better with your skills, put more focus and emphasis into developing along the lines of your skills. One artist had Mercury transiting their first in 2010 and 2011 for a few months, and during both times, that's when they did their more skilled work. Okay? They're now waiting for Mercury to come through their first house again so they can do their next batch of most skilled work. Okay? Now, on average, Mercury is going to go through the first house about every 5 years. However, Mercury is really funny. Sometimes, when he does come through, he'll hit you twice in a row. So he'll hit you 2 years or even 3 years in a row sometimes. Now, in the middle year, he'll be in there a long time. On the other 2 years, he'll just retrograde in there for a little while and then go out, so he won't be in as long. But he'll be in a retrograde position in your first house sometimes 3 times in a row. That doesn't happen very often, but it happens sometimes. Okay? But again, it's where a person develops along the line with their skills, make the best use of their skills. So that's what you're doing. You're making the best use with your skills when Mercury goes through your first house. Another artist adopted a new style. Someone who for a couple of years was sort of struggling with what style of art they wanted to do. Well, when Mercury retrograded through their first house, they started developing a style that they're more satisfied with. The previous time Mercury retrograded through their first house is when they started getting really serious about their art. Okay? And during which time is the first time they got involved with artists and got their art into a co-op gallery and things like that. Okay? So Mercury's about making the best use of your skills as it goes through your first house. Okay? What about the Sun? The Sun is going to go through your first house every year during the same period. Okay, so if you're in Aries, it's going to go there from Aries Lagna. It'll move through your first between March 21st to April 21st. Okay, if you're Taurus, from about April 21st to May 21st. So every year you have this month when the Sun goes through your first house. Okay, now the Sun's a cruel planet, so he's going to bring some pressure. But what the Sun does, it's a yearly reminder as the Sun goes through our first house that about what's important for us to get done. What our most important goals are. What the greatest things that we're going to do. What we're going to be the king of. Meaning what we're most best suited for. Okay? So it's a reminder about who we are and how that's the important thing to become, even though some other things are not working out. And usually as the Sun goes through the first house every month, there's usually a few things I find every year that I'm sort of frustrated with, and I'm not real happy with. And it always is a reminder, but the things that you really want to do, the most important thing to you, how are you with that? And can you focus on that more? So it's always a period of refocusing on what you're here and meant to do. Okay, it's a refresher. It's not as important as when Saturn, Jupiter, or Mars in retrogression go through, because it happens every year like clockwork. Just a yearly reminder, are you focused on getting done what you really need to get done? If you're unhappy and frustrated, focus more on what's really important. Not the little details of life, but what you're really here to do. And if you do that, your life will be great. Okay? Okay, now the Moon goes through the first house every month. But the only time you have to worry about the Moon is when the Moon is a full moon. That's when you really, really want to worry about it. Now when the Moon is a full moon going through your first house, the Sun, of course, is going to be over there in the 7th house. Okay? But it's the Moon we're concerned about. So the full moon moving through your first house is a time of getting your needs met. it helps you reflect upon, okay, am I getting my needs met? And by needs, I mean the things we need to maintain emotional well-being, mental poise, and physical health. If our needs aren't getting met, if we're constantly stressed by people, we start emotionally falling apart. If we're overworked, our bodies and minds might fail us depending on the nature of the work. Okay? So, it's about our needs getting met. And when the moon goes to that first house, it's always a time of finding something new, because the moon loves new things. Or relating to something new, or appreciating something in a new way, that makes us feel like, okay, this is what gets my needs met. It might be being closer with a family member. It might be making a new friend or a new acquaintance. It might be joining Facebook and having more of a social life. And probably lots of time it is, because the moon rules the face, right? So Facebook is right there in the cards when a moon transit comes along. It might be getting off Facebook, because Facebook is wasting all your time, hopefully. Okay? Better getting off than on. It can be picking up a new hobby, something that you just do for yourself. Just that you do for yourself that makes you, recharges your batteries. Okay? Now, it's usually not that much of a relationship-centered thing, because the moon has to do with the needs that we can give ourselves. Okay? Now, sometimes in our relationships, we're not giving ourselves what we could from them, in which case the moon in the first house can help us get those things from those relationships. But more the relationship-centered transit is Venus through the first house. Okay? Moon through the first house is, what can I give to myself to make me feel good and help me rest and relax because of all the things I do? Or what do I deserve to give to myself? So you might give yourself a present. You might buy yourself something you really like. Say, I really deserve this. I deserve something for myself. That's what the moon is like when it goes to the first house. It's a fun transit. It's going to happen about once every year. It's going to happen when the sun is in your 7th sign. So say you're an Aries rising. Well, the sun's going to be in Libra from, September 21st to October 21st. So between September 21st and October 21st, you're going to have the full moon in your first house. And that means it's going to be a time of, that you can get something nice. Okay, you can give yourself something, or you might find yourself feeling renewed about something. Something new and energizing to help fulfill your needs. It also can be a transit that reminds you of the importance of taking care of yourself. Okay, so you might find yourself getting worn thin because of all the things you have to do, and so it reminds you of the importance that, okay, now I have to take time to recharge and relax and do nothing. And the moon, when it does nothing, well, there's no such thing as doing nothing, but the moon is really good at doing nothing that's important, except that the fact that it gives comfort and enjoyment. And that's what the moon transit likes to do. Okay? I don't know about you guys, but I can sure use my moon coming through the full house soon. Okay? Alright. Now, the new moon can go through your first house too. And that happens once a year. Okay? When the sun's in your first house, the new moon's going to move through your first house too. I don't really need to say anything that significant about it, because it just reiterates what the sun is going through the first house doing. Okay? The sun, as I mentioned, going through the first house is a yearly reminder about getting the things done that are really you're meant to do. To get on your path and do the right things for yourself in this life. Not for yourself, but doing the right things that you're meant to do in this world. Your career, your inspirations, your aspirations, your goals and ambitions. When the full moon comes and comes through the house, that 2.5 day period, that's the most important time of the sun moving through your first house. Because you got the sun moving through your first house and the moon moving through your first house at the same time. So that's the time to really see the things in your life that aren't fulfilling your needs. And realizing, gosh, if I was just doing more of the great things I was meant to do, these little things that are not fulfilling me wouldn't be irksome to me. They wouldn't be bothering me. You know how you realize that? You're like, gosh, I'm dealing with all these trivialities, things that aren't that important because I think they're going to give me some happiness. And all they're doing is frustrating me. Well, that's what you tend to find out about your life when the new moon goes through your first house. Okay? A new moon's a dark moon. It's an evil, cruel moon. When that new moon is there, it's usually a time of letting go of some things. Okay? Or of not wanting your needs, of not trying to get our needs met by certain things. And instead, focusing on the great things we need to do. Okay? Alright, Rahu and Ketu. Rahu and Ketu will go through your first house every 18 years. When Rahu goes through your first house, it's a time of self-focus. Life becomes all about you. So enjoy it. It's a time of finding yourself, finding your path in life, finding who you're really becoming. Usually your relationship, if you have one, stops validating you as much as it used to. Or if you're really relationship-centered, you become less relationship-centered and less relationship-needy. The focus is more on your own life as an individual, doing your own thing without being held up by anyone else's ideas. Needless to say, this is a challenging transit for relationships. That's when the person who has the Rahu moving through their first house starts doing their own thing more and less relationship things together. So it's a time where there's a shift in that relationship. If a person's not in a relationship, when Rahu moves through the first house, they're usually pretty glad they're not because they want to just focus on their own path and their own goals. They don't want to be held back. It's usually a really important time for a person to find who they really are in this lifetime. Rahu transits through every house, really develop that house really rapidly and very importantly. So Rahu through the first is a really important transit for you to find yourself, basically. Okay? This year, people who have a Scorpio rising are having Rahu and Saturn going through Scorpio at the same time. So anytime you get those two guys going through your first house at the same time, it's going to be a huge year and a half. Because that's how long Rahu will be there. A year and a half, depending on how long they're going to both be there. Because it's all not only about yourself, developing yourself, it's also about, using the most of your time. You really wanting to be what you want to be, which is Rahu in the first house, and needing to make the most of your time and feeling the constraints of time, that you want to do it so much and there's no much time to do it, so you want to even do it more. So there's a lot of focus on it when you got Saturn and Rahu there. Okay? So Rahu through the first is all about finding yourself. Ketu through the first does the opposite. Ketu in the first is about letting go of yourself, letting go about your own goals, your own agendas, your own path. And more about working hand in hand with other people, developing other people's paths, or working more in partnership. Basically, working more with the Rahu in the seventh. So Ketu is a time of forgetting about yourself. You're less important. Other things are more important than you when Ketu moves through the first house. Other things are more important than what you're doing when Ketu moves through the first house. Okay? So it's a time to sort of have some self-abnegation. Forget about yourself and enjoy that freedom of not being the most important thing in your life. And that can feel really, really good. When Ketu goes through the first house, it's a great feeling. Geez, I used to always worry about all this stuff about my own life, and now I'm not. It's a nice feeling of freedom. Now, Ketu is a significator of liberation or freedom. So it's a time where you usually get the opportunity to be free from a lot of the things that you normally have to do. That can become tiring after a while. Okay, you might just get sick of always the same thing. Even if you love your path and you're on it, it's nice sometimes just to get free from that path, to get away from it for a short while. Okay? And take a break from it and focus on other things to some degree. Okay? Or other people in your life to some degree. Okay, so when Ketu goes through the first, the way life unfolds is that your path and your life somehow become less important. Lots of times I'll see this happen when people have children. I know when it was going through my first house, I had a house full of new babies. And so all of a sudden, getting my research done, writing books, wasn't the most important thing I had to do every day. It was getting these kids to stop crying and eat their food and go to sleep was way more important than that, okay? Changing diapers was more important. So, you know, the things that you're doing for yourself, the things you're doing here in the world, as an individual become less important when Ketu goes to the first, usually because you have more things you need to do for other people. So like when Ketu was going through my first, our kids were not sleeping well, and of course I had to pay more emphasis to taking care of my wife because she was feeding them and breastfeeding them, so she was more important than me during that time. So, you know, we set up the sleeping arrangements. Well, I was the one who was getting up at the middle of the night most of the time because she wasn't producing enough milk if she didn't get enough sleep, where I could just walk around like a zombie all day for a year during that transit because, you know, I didn't have to make milk. I just had to, you know, write a book. And I actually managed to write a book when Ketu was in my first. But I didn't get done as much as I wanted, for sure, because there was so much focus on the family during that time. So that's what you can expect when Ketu goes through the first house. That other people can become important. It's lots of times, because the 7th, where Rahu is in, is the 4th from the 4th, and the 4th house is the mother. And the 7th house is the 10th from the 10th, and the 10th house is the father. So the 7th house is a secondary house of your mother and father, okay, according to the Bhavam principle. Which means that the house, counted from the house, has a similar but lesser meaning. So the 4th house is the mother, therefore the 4th from the 4th has lesser meaning relevant to the mother. And the 7th is the 10th from the 10th, and the 10th house is the father. So the 7th has a lesser meaning related to the father. So your 7th house is kind of like the house where your father and mother come together, which explains why all the dumb things that you learned from your parents is the exact type of ways you have relationships. Okay? Alright. So, and the good things too, if you've had that fortunate upbringing. So lots of times when Rahu goes to the 1st of 7th, and Ketu's in the 1st, one of the reasons you become less important is because your parents become more important. One of your parents might be getting ill or something. And so as a result, you have to go take care of them or spend more time with them, and so you're not the most important thing anymore. So that's how you can sort of look at that Ketu in the 1st house. All right? So these transits, you're always going to feel them along these lines that I've mentioned. At different times, you're going to get more out of them than other times, depending on the dashas and so on. Okay? When they go through and they're retrograding, it's more important than if they're not retrograding. Okay? And it's when they go back and forth, it's a time when they are in retrogression that they are more important. Because when they are in retrogression, that's when they're the closest to the earth. That's when their influence is the strongest. Okay? So check out some charts. Go back and look at times when you've seen these transits go through these houses. And you know, just search in the search tool and call it to see when transits have moved through your 1st house. And especially the retrograde ones. And to do that, in Kala software, go to your transit hit list under the tools option menu, okay? Then I like to do like one planet at a time and then search it for a long period of time. If I do all of them, it gets a little confusing. So on the left column, click on the planet you want to search. Say you want to search on Saturn, so click Saturn. Then search conjunct first, and under that, select Bhava, okay? Then select the what's it called? The ingress into Rashis on the right side of that screen. And then put in the years you want to check and push go. Then you're going to see, then you're going to have this long list of dates of Saturn going through and entering every sign of the zodiac during that time period. But the only one you care about is the one where it says first Bhava. So, and that part will be longer. So usually you can really quickly scroll through that long list and see when it's going to be in your first bhava, or when it conjuncts your Lagna cusp. And then you can see the ingress before that and the ingress after that to see when Saturn was in your Lagna. Okay? Do that for Jupiter as well. For Mars, Mercury, and Venus, do the same thing, but also select where it says retrogression, so that Kala will show you when they retrograde. Then calculate your transits, and then look for when it's in the first house and retrograde. Skip the times it went through the first house where they weren't retrograde at first. You want to find the really big juicy ones and focus on those. So look at the ones where it was in the first at the same time that it was between a retrograde and direct time. And then you can see when that planet was affecting you. For the Sun, well, you know the Sun is going to be there every year, the same year. So find out when the Sun goes through your first house every year. For the new moon, it's going to go through at the same time. For the full moon, it's going to go through your first house 6 months difference, 6 months later or earlier than when the Sun went through your first house. Okay? So the Sun and Moon, you should just be able to know automatically that, and if you're in Aries, March 21st to April 21st, the Sun will be in your first house, and the Moon will be in your first house between September 21st and October 21st if you're in Aries rising. And so, of course, the Moon's only going to be there for 2.5 days during that month. So you got to find that 2.5 day period in that month. Okay? So you can use Kala to help you find these transits. Once we learn all the transits you're going to use in this class, then you can just use the animated transit screen and just look at where all the transits are and immediately start drawing conclusions. But especially now when you want to get the feel for these transits and what they've done to you or what they've done to other people, you want to search them for like 20, 30 years or the whole life of the person, and then look through them and say, oh yeah, I remember this is the time that this happened. So you get a feel for what these transits are doing. Okay, thank you.